open your Bibles along with me. We're in the Gospel according to Luke, and it's chapter 21 where we're studying presently. Last week we looked at the beauty that Jesus beheld. Even as he approached the darkest hours of his life, he showed us the wisdom of finding something beautiful. Even in a place that he had just said, it's like a robber's den. And yet even in a robber's den, there's generosity, there's beauty. And we read in chapter 21, verse 1, that Jesus looked up, and the first thing he saw was the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. And that would be the first thing you'd see, because that's exactly what they wanted. You know, if ever you look for something good, the first thing you'll see probably isn't that good, because there's a lot of things that just want to make a big show of who they are. A lot of things that'll jump in front of your face, and just don't be discouraged by that. Here, big staged production, it was always that way when the rich would put in their money and the way that they would do it. And so Jesus saw that, but he didn't stay with that. He looked and he saw what was truly beautiful, what maybe no one else would notice. He saw a certain poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. Here she was doing what love dictated, something she wanted to do, something she certainly never thought of as heroic or certainly thought of as something to be noticed, but that's the very thing, the kind of beauty that the Lord would notice. And he said, truly, I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of the others put together. For they all out of their surplus put into the offering. She out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on. And so the beauty of love, simple gifts, simply given. We took the whole time last week to talk about that. And Jesus called his disciples, we're told, and asked that they would see. Did you see what happened? And he explained to them, here's what happened. But they didn't get it. They didn't learn the lesson that day. It wasn't a wasted lesson. The lessons of love, I don't believe, are ever wasted. But on the disciples that day, they were blind because they were enamored. They were already caught up with something they were seeing that looked so much better. They were so in awe of other things that they looked to, that when something really beautiful happened, like I'm afraid a lot of us, they missed it for the moment. They remembered later. They're the ones who wrote down these things. But Jesus called their attention to that. But here's where their attention was. It says, verse 5, that while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, as for these things that you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be left one stone standing upon another. They will all be torn down. So here they're in awe at the great works of the great Herod, what this king had accomplished. You know, of course, his name is on the plaque. Here's what Herod did, but Herod probably didn't do anything. He had his slaves and his servants and other ways of making other people work, but he was Herod the Great, and here was this building that had been, in fact, Herod was dead, but the building is still being built. If your project's going on longer than you would like, you're not the first for that. It was huge, and it was going on. It was considered one of the wonders of the world. And so, you know, wondrous, no doubt. And I don't blame the disciples. I love architecture. I love beautiful things and works of art. It was truly wondrous, no doubt. But what Jesus reminds them is that it's built on sand. That this temple and all that it stands for can't stand for much longer. Because it's built upon something not like this woman who did something out of love. It's something that just can't endure. And so he gives them that lesson, and then he answers their question. Because as soon as he said that, they questioned him, verse 7 tells us, and they said, Rabbi, teacher, when therefore will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? They considered a thing like that the end of the world. It would be as though we were to see the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial and all of these buildings that may have some significance to us as U.S. citizens, all of them just lying in rubble. But more than that, because this wasn't just some building to man, a monument of a nation that's only been around a couple of hundred years. This was their father's house, or so it was supposed to be. This is the temple of God. This is the great temple in Jerusalem. And so to hear that it's going to be demolished, as far as they were concerned, that's the end of the world. And they were frightened. They said, when will these things be? And so the answer that follows, the one that we'll read a good portion of here today, one you've probably read the answer many, many times and come up with different opinions in different times of your life as to what in the world is he talking about. The fact is that the answer, as long, as full as it is, it actually leaves us, certainly leaves me, with a whole lot of questions. And the fact that it leaves me with questions doesn't mean that it's not a good answer. It just means that, I guess, those questions aren't real great concerns. But it does answer our greatest need. And that's always important to know. We've got lots of wants, but what do you need? And this section that we're going to look at today, it answers our greatest need, which is not the need to know. Sometimes we think that's the case. The greatest need is the need to live. And the answer that he gives teaches us how to live without fear, how to live without worry, how to live without waste, which worry always produces, how to really live, how to fully and freely live, how to enjoy life, live out the abundance of life without all these things that drain, and to live it out all the way to the last drop, like drop dead. That's the last drop. But even that isn't like, oh no, I got to stand a little longer. No, down to the last drop. I'm going to live my life because I'm not afraid of death any longer because of the kinds of things that kind Jesus said. The kinds of things that we can look at here today. He says, here's how to live. Here's how to live life without fear and worry and waste. And then all these verses that follow. Last week, I was in a motel, and I decided to turn on the TV because I thought, why not? I mean, I could give you a million reasons why not, but I really wasn't worried about that. I don't have a problem like some folks. I just don't. My problem is boredom sometimes, and so I'm very discreet, careful, turn it on. It's got a zillion channels, but I went down the thing, and went to the History Channel, because I haven't had cable TV in a lot of years, and even when we had cable TV, I quit watching the History Channel because they quit showing history. I was interested in history, and all they wanted to do was Duck Dynasty or something, some swamp monster or whatever, and I just thought, I didn't even tune in. But I was there in the hotel, I thought, okay, well, History Channel, let's try that. And on came something that captured my attention until I fell asleep maybe an hour later, but and laughed but it was a documentary called The Last Pope, and it was scary. It was meant to be scary. Every time they'd show the last pope, he was like smoke coming out of him. He was the last pope, and it was this whole thing about this prophecy that was given in 1500 or 1400 or whatever by a Irish priest who became canonized later on. And I love my Roman Catholic background because I love my family and I love my friends, and I have 1,000,001 great memories, but I have some bad memories as well. And this one brought up some of the bad memories because it in all of this, like in any kind of documentary, you always have to have interviewed experts, and everybody's an expert, right? They're professors. They've spent their whole life studying these prophecies of this Irish saint, Saint Malachy. And they were true believers. I don't think they were just in it for the money. I think they were sincere believers that this was one of the most amazing prophecies that ever came down the pike. And you can watch the shows on a Mayan calendar or whatever. You'll find a true believer about everything, assuming they're sincere and they truly believe. But I believe these people were true believers. And it's been a while since I've been around true, super dedicated Catholic believers. Most of those in my family have passed on. But these people, they were interviewed, and they were just in awe and amazement of this prophecy and all of these things. And so I watched and the things. And even though Malachy, an Irish saint, sounds a lot like malarkey, I watched and I looked and I thought, given all the points that they had, because what it came down to, many of you are probably already know this and you're scared to death because you know it, but according to this ancient prophecy, the one we've got right now, forget what you think of him, what kind of a person he is, he may be the last pope. And then the end of the world. And so they were going on, and of course they got to sell something every 5 minutes. They leave you hanging and they go off and sell you some kind of insurance program or something. And then they come back and they keep doing that, the last pope, and giving all this stuff, and these true believers saying, here's why. And if all I listened to was them, I might have started getting scared. Maybe. How do I know? Maybe this is it. And then they tied it into Fatima, which is one I knew a whole lot more about from my own Catholic school days. And they went to Our Lady of Fatima, and I knew since I was a kid that these 3 little kids had seen the Virgin Mary, or so they said, and all these people, they even made a Hollywood movie. I saw the movie. I watched the sun dance in the sky. And these people were true believers about what happened at Fatima, and Mary gave these 3 kids three secrets. Don't tell the secrets, just give them to the Pope at a certain time. And a couple of them were revealed, and a couple of them, given the time, World War I and Russia and all of that, they were in setting with the time. But I found it interesting, memories coming back to me as I'm watching it, that when Our Lady appeared to these 3 little kids, the first thing she did was show them a vision of hell. I thought, now that's nice. That's what you do to a little kid. First thing you do, you show them all the terrors and horrors of hell. And then, we'll go from there. And it may make you a nun, as a couple of them became. It may affect your whole life, but it's just this fear-based, horrible thing, and they went on with all of that. And then after the whole program's over, I later go to those who aren't necessarily true believers, who maybe give a few of the other facts that weren't included, and I can pretty quickly conclude it is malarkey. It's just stuff. But there are true believers in end times, last days scenario, and they're not just the ones that you and I may have heard of before. They're all over the world in all kinds of cultures. It's always about fear. It's always about this thing that may happen. And if you're a true believer, well, you just kind of arrange the facts and ignore a few others and set them up in a certain way, and it's like, be scared. It's the end. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Because when I watched it, I knew where we were going. I knew what our next section would be, and it just struck me, how different is Jesus? How totally different is he, not just than this one scene, where you show the hell first off, but different than all of the scenes that don't just leave you with this vague thing to keep you guessing and waiting for the final bomb to drop or whatever. He knows right from the beginning, his words about this temple that wouldn't stand much longer, and it didn't. It didn't stand another 40 years, 30, 40 years, it was down. He knew that would scare the wits out of them. And like a good shepherd, as soon as the flock is alarmed and frightened, he doesn't go into a whole thing of, now I can use it. Because you know what? When you're a weak person, fear is a powerful, powerful tool. Ask any dictator, any organization, religious or political, that keeps people in check by fear. Fear is a powerful tool. Fear works. Fear will move you when nothing else. Ask any drill sergeant. Fear will get you going. Fear can move you, it can motivate you, it can control you, it can destroy you. And the Lord who loves us, knowing that fear is destructive. We were never designed to live on adrenaline, to always be watching and waiting, and when's it going to happen? I'm vigilant. No, you're not. You're paranoid. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your life. So as soon as Jesus knows, of course, they're scared. The flock is frightened. I just said that the temple won't stand much longer. You see how he immediately goes into words that are intended to comfort, words that are intended to calm them, and words that I think will have the same effect if we read them from his heart to ours. They said, when will it happen? And here's what he said, verse 8, at least as far as we're going to read today. He said, see to it that you not be misled. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Don't follow after them. And when you hear of wars and disturbances, don't be frightened. For these things must take place first, but the end doesn't immediately follow. He said, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes in various places, plagues, famines. There will be terrors of all kinds, great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay hands on you. And they will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. So make up your minds ahead of time. Don't prepare beforehand to defend yourselves. For I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all on account of my name, and yet not a hair of your head will perish. And by your perseverance, by your hanging in there, your endurance, you will master, control, hold on to your souls, hold on to your lives. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is at hand, and then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of the city depart, and let not those who are in the country enter the city. Because these are days of vengeance, in order that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Woe to those who are with child, and to those who nurse babes in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land, and wrath to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all of the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So, if you can, if possible for a few minutes now, if you can just forget everything that you've heard about these verses and just remember what you read. What we just read, just now. Remember that, we'll go back to it a bit. But understand first off, I think you see it, some of these words are not aimed at us. Some of them are clearly spoken for those who are in Judea. I visited there once, but this was people who their whole lives had been lived there. It was for people who would actually see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. It happened, but he's talking to them in some places. He's talking to those who would actually be taken into synagogues and put on trial in synagogues. That doesn't happen anymore. Even in modern-day Israel, it's not in the synagogue. Be brought into the courts of kings. And of course, if you read the gospel according to Luke, part 2, the book of Acts, you'll see that, all of this stuff happened. And he's saying things to them at that time. There are other things in what we just read that are timeless. They're words of encouragement, words of comfort for any of us, anytime, who have ears to hear, who want to hear, who want to receive it. And so certainly for the little bit of time we have here this morning, our focus is going to be on the timeless things. Our focus is going to be on those things that would encourage and comfort any of us at any times in our lives when we feel like, man, it's the end of the world. At least for me, for my family. And in those times, these words always apply. And within what we just read so far, I think we'll finish the latter half next week, but in that section that we just now read, I see 4 directives, 4 things to do. Not speculation, not things to frighten you or things to stir your curiosity. 4 very specific things where he says, do this. And if you do that, you'll lead a better life. You'll make the most of your life. Your life will be more like what God would want it to be. And so that's where we'll focus. And the first of those 4 things is right there at the beginning. It's right there in verse 8. Jesus said, see to it that you not be misled. Many will come in my name saying, I am, or I am he. And they'll say, this is it, last days, time is at hand. He says, don't follow after them. So 2 things, really they're just one. Don't be misled, don't follow after someone who claims to be a leader, claims to be Messiah. And how many? In our lifetimes, how many through history have claimed this is the end, have claimed that they're some sort of Messiah figure, some sort of grand guru, some Alibaba that's going to lead everyone to the great whatever. It's happened over and over. Jesus simply says, for all time, don't be fooled, don't be followers. You see, it's not about be smart enough to follow the right leader. He's saying don't follow anybody. You cannot be misled if you don't let anyone lead you. If you refuse to be a follower, you won't be fooled. Jesus said, call no man father, teacher, leader, rabbi. He didn't say guru, but he didn't speak that language. He could have. Didn't use the word mentor, but sometimes even what we mean by mentor, it's kind of like that. It's somebody that you kind of set your heart and mind and sense of direction aside, and you just go with what they say because this is my leader. Jesus said, don't call anyone that because you have one who's in heaven, and you're all brothers and sisters, and that's not a put down. Love your brothers and sisters, which means listen to them. Listen to your brothers and sisters, even if they don't claim themselves to be a prophet. It's your brother, it's your sister. Love them, listen to them, learn from them, but don't let them lead you. Now, for a lot of us, you consider a specific brother or sister, you go, no way, no worries, I won't. But don't let anyone be your leader in that sense. Love them, listen to them, learn from them. We all add something. We can all add something to one another. But ultimately, when it comes to making decisions, decide for yourself. Hear what they have to say, love them, decide for yourself. And if you're in a setting, whether it's religious or political or family, where there's a lot of domination, where there's a lot of control, maybe where there's a lot of fear used, when you do that, when you say, no, you know what, I'm going to decide for myself, they're going to pull out scriptures, because there are scriptures you can pull out. And they're going to say it's rebellion. But I'll tell you right now, it's obedience. Follow what Jesus said. Don't be a follower. Follow Jesus. Yes, there's a way that seems right. Yes, there are all kinds of things that you can get yourself scared about. But your Heavenly Father knows what you need. Talk to your Heavenly Father. Trust in Jesus. That's the first thing. That's the best thing you can do with your life. Secondly, he says in verse 9, when you hear of wars and disturbances, don't be terrified, for these things have to take place first, but the end doesn't immediately follow. He says nations will rise against nation. Kingdom will rise against nation. There will be great earthquakes. There will be all kinds of plagues and diseases and famines and terrors and even great signs in the sky. And again, throughout history, how many have there been? But the one thing he says to do in all of that is don't be frightened. Don't be terrified. Now, for those who heard him that day, the ones who did live in Judea and who would see Jerusalem surrounded by Roman armies, for them, over the next 20 or 30 years, they would hear of all kinds of rumors, because that's human nature. You hear of rumors. Even today, when we have the technological ways of looking in on the world and hearing from the world in an instant, still, is it real news or is this fake news? Is this really happening? What's going on? A couple of weeks ago, I can't remember what I was saying. I said something at the very beginning for the first song, something about, did you read the news today or whatever? And everyone gave me that look like, oh man, I knew I should have had my smartphone on, And it must be bad news. We're going to find out in a second that something, in a second, something can. But for them, when news traveled really, really slow, can you imagine for the next 20 or 30 years, 40 years, 35 years, waiting for the temple to come down because Jesus said the temple would come down? And during those 20, 30 years, how often they would hear of something? There's a war. And there were wars. There was this Pax Romana, there was this peace based upon the power of Rome, but there were wars and other empires and struggles, and there were, of course, earthquakes. This is the Mediterranean. And of course there were diseases, always have been, and there were areas in which there were famines. So for the next 20, 30 years or more, how often they would have been thinking, this is it. But Jesus kindly said right from the beginning, that's not it. That's just, well, now we, for 20 centuries, not personally have we heard about it, but we have the capacity to look into history and see that these things have happened, and even in my short lifetime, I say again, short lifetime. How many times I've seen, everything just kind of put it together. Look, connect the dots, this is it. And then I look back in history at times that I didn't live in, and I think, wow, how could you not see the beginnings of World War II? How could you not see that as the Antichrist and the end? But in all of that, for all that we've gone through, and Lord knows what we'd go through, and he knows what we will go through, but in all of that, there's one thing that Jesus said: don't be afraid of it. That kind of stuff is not the sign of the end. That's just the sign that you're in the world, because in the world, those things exist. Don't be afraid of those things. Now, one day, someone's going to predict the end, and they'll be right. Just like a broken clock, somebody's going to just happen to get the time right. But it'll be a matter of chance, not of any prophetic ability. So, watch whatever show you want to watch, read whatever book you want to read if it entertains you. But if it frightens you, we've already got 2 directives from Jesus. Don't be followers and don't be frightened. And those are timeless truths. Doesn't matter what era, what age, what time you live in. Don't be followers. Don't be frightened. And then, thirdly, he says in verse 12, but before all these things, and they're nice talking to the people right there and then, but before all these other stuff, they're going to lay hands on you. They're going to persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and the prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. And it will lead to an opportunity for your testimony, so make up your minds ahead of time not to prepare yourselves ahead of time in order to defend yourselves. For I will give you utterance and wisdom, which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be delivered even up by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Now that's very specific, and that's very frightening. But again, I think you see by now, Jesus didn't say this to frighten them. He said it because it was a certainty. It's going to happen to you. And I'm telling you something that you can't avoid, and you don't worry about it because you can't stop it, but I'm telling you something in order to prepare you. You can't control it, and you'll waste your time and energy trying to control it, trying to put together a better defense, trying to come up with a better insurance policy. Forget it. It's going to happen, he says. And that helps you to at least adjust the fact that, you know what? Somehow we'll get through it, but it's going to happen. And it helps you to get through it to know that, look, when it happens, don't take it personally. Even though there's family members that do this, don't feel like this is all just about you. It's because you weren't a good enough witness, because you didn't do something well enough. It's going to happen. And it's not about your value, it's about their freedom. Because even God won't control it. Because God is into freedom. Because God is into love. He's going to give real freedom so that there can be real love. And because people have the freedom to love, they also have the freedom to hate and to persecute. And sometimes it happens, and it's horrible when it happens in your own family. But again, don't take it personally. It's not about you and your value. It's about them and their freedom. And it's not the end of the world for them or for you. But horrible things happen. And he's very specific, as we just read here. He's very specific because for them, it was going to be very, very difficult. Now, this sort of scenario, it would be difficult for anybody, anywhere, anytime. I think you know that. But bear in mind, these were the first true believers, the first believers in Jesus Christ to suffer those kinds of things. And do you know how hard it would be when you're the first ones to go through it? Because there's no precedent. There's no one else to say, others have gone through it, others have gotten through it, here's their witness. It's like we're the first ones, and then you feel like, what a failure we are. And how easy it is to look at one another and say, well, is it my fault? Is it your fault? And so whenever you're the first one to go through something, then you need some extra help. They needed to be told specifically what was going to happen because they were going to go through things like no one else has. Many have gone through it since, but no one else has gone through it first like they did. So he told them specifically because they needed to know, I don't. You don't. That's the important part. Because he gave them specific help in that way, it was help for them. You know, I'll just talk for myself. That's the only one I know too much about anyway. It wouldn't help me. Now, if I were the first, then yeah, but you know what? A lot of people have gone through a lot of things, and I can get a lot of help by the fact that, you know what, it's not just me, and I'm not the only one, and a lot of good people have gone through some really cruddy things in this world, and you know, I don't need to know, and you know what? I don't want to know. I wouldn't want to know the future. I don't want to know what terrible thing's going to happen the year ahead, and God in his love doesn't tell me because it wouldn't help me. And I say, thank you, Lord, that you don't frighten me, that you don't warn me, that you don't, no, instead you tell me, here's what I warn you, be afraid of the fear inside of you and the way you can waste your life, and don't worry, and move forward in love. Those are the things that he teaches me, because those are the things that I need to know. And I know I've already wasted enough of my life with worry and fear. I know I have, because I'm me. And I have my fears, and I have my worries. As a little kid, you know, Steve talked earlier about Emily's childhood dreams. I had childhood nightmares. All kinds of things I was scared of. And my older brothers would help me find new ones I never even thought of. I was scared by a lot of stuff. And I was living in a time, like a number of you, living in the shadow of the Cold War. Literally going to school and being taught by the nuns how to say my Hail Marys while I was underneath the desk, putting my head between my knees, saying Hail Mary, and being told if the bright light hits, don't look up, because your eyes will run down your face. And of course, that was in a place where I was also taught about Our Lady of Fatima, who starts out by showing you pictures of hell. And that was kind of the upbringing that I had, and so many things I was afraid of. I remember one night being terrified, all the news things about the wars and all the stuff going on, and didn't want to be drafted, didn't want to be a soldier, and I'm, you know, like 8, 9 years old, and my mom's saying they're not going that low yet. Don't, you know, your brothers are in danger maybe at some point, but they're not getting the 8 or 9 year olds just yet. Don't worry, honey. That's what love does. That's what a good shepherd, a good friend does. Doesn't frighten, just says, you know what, those things happen. It's not like there's not a war. It's not like it may not happen to your brothers, but we're not going to be worried about them. But you see, now as I'm older, so many of the things that I wasted time worrying about, all those worries, they missed me. They just totally missed me. It didn't happen. I never got drafted. I had a plan, but the Vietnam War ended, and my draft number was low, and now I will never be drafted. I don't care what the war is. They're not going to want me. Yee-haw! But you know what? It's not just about me. I know that's hard for me to believe, but it's true. It's not just about me. And I certainly know when the biggest attendance we ever had in this church on a Tuesday night, when we had Tuesday night Bible studies, was Tuesday night 9/11. And this place was packed because everyone was scared. And my kids were draft age at that time. And a lot of the people here coming into the sanctuary were right about that age. And some were ready to volunteer. We're going to war. We don't know who did it and where to go. But, you know, we saw the Pentagon. We saw places of our significance, you know, the towers torn down. And we're angry and we want to. And I remember that time being concerned for those young people, being concerned for my boys. But now, you know, one of my younger son, just 35, my other son, 38. Even they will probably never go to a foreign war. As a kid, all the sicknesses, the things I thought it would kill me, it didn't kill me. I lived. When my children were little, I was concerned that I might see my children carried off in a coffin one day, and worried when they were sick, but it never happened. And on and on and on, I can talk about mine, you think about yours, but the fact is, most of them have missed me. But you know what? It's not because I'm any better or any prayed harder. It's just it didn't hit me. But now I got grandkids. Now I got 5 that I could worry about. Now, there's always something to worry about. Now I've got more liabilities, more people I love in this world. And I could magnify my worries, but I hope I've learned that I've wasted enough of my life worrying about things that never would hit me, and then facing the fact that something will hit me. And it may be one of my grandkids. It may be someone's going to die of cancer somewhere. I've already seen enough people do that. It may be me, but I'm going to enjoy it, like I said, down to the last drop. Enjoying life because I'm not going to worry about it. Because I'm going to take these words of Jesus saying, don't defend yourself. Don't put up your protectives. Don't think that by all of your worry walls, you're going to keep this stuff out. This stuff is bound to happen. It's not the end of the world, but these kinds of things, they happen. Don't take it personally. Don't think that it's all about you. Don't waste a lot of time worrying about things that never happen. But when something does happen, because things happen, when they do happen, just understand when there's one of these situations and you've not lived behind concrete walls, it's good. You've lived freely. And now, he says, verse 14, make up your minds, don't prepare beforehand to defend yourselves. So don't be afraid, don't be a follower, and don't be putting up these defensive walls and defensive arguments and thinking that behind these concrete walls, I'm safe. No, you're imprisoned. Just let it go. Stuff's going to happen. But if you follow the path of love, if you follow the path of the Lord, you'll have the fullest life that can be had at any given time. And so all of that specific to this point. Calamities will come, but don't take it personally. Don't be defensive. Don't worry about it. And then fourthly, finally, he says in verse 20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, recognize her desolation is at hand, and it was. And let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the city of Jerusalem get out of there. Let not those who are in the country enter into that city, because these are the days of vengeance. Not the vengeance of God, the vengeance of the Romans. You wouldn't love them. You didn't want them in the court that was supposed to be a place of prayer for the Gentiles. You didn't want to turn the extra cheek or go the extra mile. No, you wanted to make Israel great again, and now Rome is greater. And that's the way it is in a dog-eat-dog world. Here comes the big dog. He says, when that happens, it's just fulfilling what was written, what was going to take place. And those who specifically read that and heard that and believed Jesus, and those who obeyed Jesus, they got out of Jerusalem. They saw it coming. It took a while. There was a siege. It took months, years. But they got out, and if they were on the outside and someone were saying, we got to go defend Jerusalem, come on, it's our patriotic duty, they'd say, you know what? I'm obeying Jesus. I'm not going into the city. This is not our fight. I'm not going to die on that hill. That's not, you call it my patriotic duty. I've got a higher duty. I'm going to follow the Lord. And those who believed Jesus, when he specifically said that to them at that time, they not only lived longer, because living longer can just be more misery. If you live in guilt and shame and fear. They not only lived longer, they lived better because they had his words that told them they should do that. Because don't you know, for the rest of their life, they had friends and family members and people who died in Jerusalem. And the rest of their lives are going to feel like, what a coward I was. What a deserter I was. They died trying to defend the city, and I just let it go. What a traitor I was. And they would have these words of Jesus that says, no, I told you. You obeyed me. That wasn't the fight you were going to win. Live longer. Not just so you can live longer, but the world needs what you have. The world needs what you can now give. They died, those who lived by the sword died by the sword, but you got a much better life ahead of you. And so he gave them those specific words, specific for them, but he gave us many similar words for the same sort of comfort. Turn the other cheek and go the extra mile. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We are more than conquerors through him who loved us. All those things that will help us to say, you know what? I'm not a coward. I'm not a deserter. It would have been easier to go along with the current, but you know what? I believe that this was the time when I should instead do something different, no matter what anyone else calls me. I'm listening to the voice of my true shepherd. And he is a good shepherd, and he's a perfect shepherd. He's a perfect protector. I believe that. Though I don't understand, I believe that you and I, and anyone who wants it, we have in this crazy, crazy dog-eat-dog world, we still have perfect protection. Imagine for a moment if you heard the horror of what Jesus said to them. Imagine just for a moment that if all of a sudden right here, not Our Lady of Fatima, but our Lord of Fresno suddenly appeared. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying believe it if it did. But just suppose, just for a moment, imagine all of a sudden it's Jesus. He's shining. He's glowing. We all see him. No one's saying, we don't have to hear anyone else. We all saw him. There he is. Jesus stood right here in all of this glory, and none of us have to doubt. He says to us, imagine, he said it to you right now, verse 16, you will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you folks sitting right here to death. And you will be hated by all on account of my name. You know, if he said that, and then I just got over this message about we have perfect protection, I think, like me, you'd probably say, perfect protection? That sounds like total abandonment. But here's the next thing. He says, yet not a hair of your head will perish. And then immediately, if you're like me, you say, what does that mean? It means after my family has turned me in and they've killed me and I'm laying there in my coffin, that it's going to be a good hair day and all my hair. Do I care? Did Marie Antoinette care what her hair looked like after the guillotine? Doesn't matter how much you're into appearance and looks. No one cares about your hair except God. The very hairs of your head are numbered. In other words, the most insignificant part of who you are will not be lost. And that's the point. That's the thing to hold on to. I don't know how, just hold on to that. Believe him. Someday you'll see and then you'll know. Not the least part of your life will perish if you walk in love. If you follow his directives, you have full protection. Dual protection, double protection. He'll tell you what you need to know, but nothing to worry you. If you need to know, if it'll help you, he'll tell you. If he doesn't tell you, it wouldn't help you. And then when things happen and you need his help, he's going to tell you. And he's already told you the things that you need to know in every way. I like that. Just tell me what I need to know. And don't you know, he will? You read all of this, he will. And not a hair of your head will perish somehow. And finally, verse 19 says, and by your perseverance, you will hold on to your soul. Your life, our lives pass through this body. It's part of life. But your soul, your psyche, who you are, God has put that into your hands. And there's a way to hold on to it. And the way you hold on to it is exactly the ways that he said here. Don't be frightened. Don't be a follower. Don't be defensive. And when the time comes, sometimes the way forward is the way of retreat. You're not a coward. You're not a wimp. Because you didn't defend yourself. You actually took the strong course. And in all of those ways, these are timeless truths. All of you know, we see it. We don't need anyone to tell us. Everything that we see is falling apart. Eventually it will. Everything physical fades away. Let it go. It's going to go. Let it go. It belongs to God. But in the end, we'll see that nothing is lost. In the hands of the Master, nothing material, nothing physical is lost. Even in the hands of Jesus, when he multiplied the loaves and fishes, it wasn't like, oh, I can do more. It's like nothing goes to waste. That's who he is. So all the physical things that are fading away, let them go, let them go, let them go. Don't worry about it. It's going to happen. Buildings, monuments, kings, kingdoms. Don't worry. It's going to go. Guaranteed, it's going to go. But your soul is in your hands because the Lord of love has lovingly given you a say about your own soul, about your own life. What are you going to do with your life? He'll take care of all the stuff. He will. And you'll see that none of this stuff gets lost. He takes care of that. He's able to work all things together for good. That's not hard for him. It's hard for us to just trust him for that. But for your own soul, trust. Don't be frightened. Don't be a follower. Don't be defensive. Don't be a hero. Just walk in love. Listen to what he says. And walking in love, again, sometimes it feels like it's a retreat. No. If you move forward in love, it doesn't matter what direction you're going. You're moving forward. That's a true progressive. Progressing in love, in liberty, in freedom. Knowing that God's not going to take it away from someone else. You know, he's going to give them the freedom to hurt you. But now you have the choice. What are you going to do with that hurt? What are you going to do next?
Trust in the Lord will never be shaken. Those